Hello, everyone, and welcome to Venus Fest's third and final keynote presentation with ISKWÄ as part of our mentorship program, a summer series where a group of selected developing artists and industry members are receiving mentorship from some of the music community's most unique and gifted members. Please feel free to ask questions in the live chat and interact, as we will have time for a Q&A at the end. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that Venus Fest takes place on the traditional unceded Indigenous territory of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. If you are tuning in and are a settler, please take some time to learn about the history of the land on which you live, the Indigenous communities who have cared for the land and water, and how you might participate in restoring justice. It is my immense honor to introduce ISKWÄ to you all today, who has built an exciting and unique career in Canadian music, and she will be sharing with us today about her path as an artist. ISKWÄ is a creator and communicator of music and of movement, of pictures, poetry, and prose, and a teller of stories that have impacted our past and will inform our future. She is Cree Métis from Treaty 1 territory, born and raised in Winnipeg. She is an urban Indigenous two-spirited woman from the Red River Valley, the birthplace of the Métis Nation. ISKWÄ has been nominated for several Juno Awards, as well as longlisted for the Polaris Prize, and nominated for the Prism Prize and SOCAN Songwriting Prize. She has performed hundreds of shows in Canada and internationally, including on Ottawa's Parliament Hill and Canada's National Arts Centre Orchestra, in New York City at the Met and Summer Stage in Central Park, and beyond for the King and Queen of Sweden, Reeperbahn in Germany, and Border Crossings Origins Festival in England. ISKWÄ is also an ambassador and program participant for the PRS Key Change Initiative. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, ISKWÄ.
Thank you, Ekosani. Tanse nitotamak ninaoma ISKWÄ. My name is ISKWÄ. In the Cree language, it is the word for woman. So my full name in our language is ISKWÄ, which means blue sky woman. And this name is, it's very important to me. It was gifted to me in ceremony by my elder, and it was one that connects me to that which is bigger than me, that which is greater than us here in the walking world. It's this connection to family up in the sky and beyond our ancestors and so on. So it's lovely to be here. I'm honored to be here. I'm excited to be here. And I would love to share with you guys just some stories about some of my experiences in this, big, bustling, wild world we call the entertainment industry. So I am born and raised in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I am what you would call an urban Indigenous person. I grew up in the city, and my family comes from there since before there was paperwork. So when I say I'm from Winnipeg, from Treaty 1, this is just since the dawn of time. That's where my family, my ancestors, we come from there. And as a young person growing up in Winnipeg, this is predating the internet era. I mean, yes, the internet existed, but it wasn't anything like it is now. and this was 9,000 years ago, so you can imagine what the internet was like back then. I didn't have access to making music at home. Definitely I didn't have access to getting it out and spreading it to people online through social media, through any of these things. But I also didn't have access to any stories of people who were like me, and went on to do music as a career. So I never actually thought that it was something I could do. It was always something that I loved and that I would, in the back of my mind, dream about. But I dreamt about it, in the same way that you might dream about visiting Never Never Land and hanging out with Tinkerbell. Like it was, just nothing that was a reality in my mind. And I actually started off, many people don't know this, but I started off as a dancer. So I danced for 1,000 years before I made my way into music. And the path was very, like I took music lessons as a kid. And I sang with the Winnipeg Girls Choir as a kid. And then when I was a teenager, I was so focused on dance and visual art and, being sullen and probably smoking too much pot and like all of these things that took me, in a different direction. And so even though I would sing, I actually taught myself to sing up in my room when nobody was listening. And I would sing to my favorite En Vogue, Whitney Houston. Like I taught myself to sing over these legends, these women with incredibly powerful voices. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I was mimicking. I was like, okay, I hear sounds and I can feel where it places. And, I had a bit of an understanding of what my instrument and my tool was capable of. And it was not, perfection, but it was definitely, it was fun and I loved it, but it was mine and it was private. And so I was, we'll fast forward a few years and I was about 20, I think. And I was working for, I'm always so hesitant to tell this story, but I'm going to tell it to you guys anyways. I was working for an investment company and I was in university. My plan was that I was going to become a lawyer, and I was in it working for this investment company, and I worked in their call center, and it was for like mutual funds, and numbers are not my strong suit, but when it comes to like picking up the phone and being like, okay, you want me to move some money into this account? Sure. That's what I was doing. And my friend who sat next to me was like, I just saw that Canadian Idol is coming to Canada. So American Idol was all the rage at the time, but Canadian Idol hadn't happened yet. And she was like, so they're coming here. This is going to be the first time, and I'm going to audition. And I'm like, you're going to audition? Like you can just go and audition? She's like, yeah, you just, and she explained everything. And so I was like, well, this is fantastic. I want to go and audition. So I went home and I told my partner at the time, and we had been living together already at this point for like 2 years or so. And I came home and I'm like, hey, I want to audition for Canadian Idol. And he looked at me and he's like, but do you know how to sing? And I'm like, I think so. I don't really know. So I went in Winnipeg, the apartments, they're called character buildings, which means they're very, very beautiful, but also very, very old. And the way these apartments worked was you had, rooms kind of like at opposite ends in a very long hallway. So I asked him to go stand at one end of the apartment, and I went to the very opposite end, and I belted out with everything in me, Black Velvet by Alana Miles. And he came into the room, and when I was done, and he was like, all right, if this is what you want to do, then let's do it. He was a business person. So he's like, you should take some voice lessons because you need to, practice and get tips and so on. But you should also consider doing some recitals, because if you want to go and audition, you need some practice getting on stage and performing in front of people. Now, for me, it was like, that's fine. I've performed on stages for dance so many times. So like stage fright isn't brand new and blah, blah, blah. And I was a little bit like, okay, I'll do what you say, but, and, so I did. I went and did the lessons, some recitals, and then it was audition time. The auditions, the way they ran them is they kind of corral everybody into these rooms, and you'd go in, and there were multiple stages. And so I made it through all of the beginning stages to get to the, like the big audition where you walk into the room and the 4 cranky judges are sitting there staring at you, and they're doing it. They're probably not cranky, but they're like, you know, doing their best to keep in character. And they're staring at you, and they're kind of like, you know, they seem so disinterested, again, in character. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm in it. I'm going to do this. I made it through all those rounds. This is no problem. And so I decided to sing a Whitney Houston song. I chose I Have Nothing. And it was going wonderfully until there was a really high note, and I shot for it, and I missed it by a long shot. And they all went like this, and I kind of was like, okay. And then I was like, you know, I finished the song, and I was like, great, thanks. And I booked it out of the room before they could make fun of me, because I was like, I know that this was not great, but I'm going to leave right away. And I did. I left. And when I got out of that room, the first thing that crossed my mind was, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And it was in that exact moment that I realized how much I loved singing, number one. I loved the excitement of that audition, number two. And even though I didn't succeed in terms of moving forward, I had overcome this fear, this, you know, like this apprehension, or even just this state of being stuck in thinking that I couldn't do it. And I did it. And that was enough for me to be like, okay, I'm in. And so I went home and I spoke with my partner, and I was like, this is what I want to do. I really, you know, and I was lucky to have family that was so supportive. And so within I think maybe 2 years or so, we moved to Toronto, and that's when it all began. I started going to open mics in Toronto and building a relationship with musicians. You know, like it was interesting. Again, it feels, you know, like you can date yourself, but it felt like such a pocket of time. You know, and all of the musician friends that I made back then are still wonderful friends now. And so it's great to see how we came up together. I was in Toronto for about a year or so, and then I was actually pulled to the United States, and I decided to pack everything up, and I'm like, you know what, if I'm going to go after this dream, I'm going to go for it. And I wound up in New York and Los Angeles. And when I got there, I was about 25 years old. I was very green to the music industry, and I was there by myself, which, you know, the reason I'm sharing this part is because the experience of this industry in itself is very, can be very challenging for use of a very diplomatic word. You know, it can be a very toxic place. It can be extremely rewarding, but I do feel that, you know, as we are coming up in this industry, there are so many people who are looking for the ones that they can kind of stick their fingers in and, you know, find a way to pull whatever they can out of that person. And so when I got to Los Angeles, this was absolutely my experience. It was great. It was, I call it like a crash course in the music industry. I was there for 3.5 years or so. And I actually wrote a good chunk of my first album while I was split between New York and Los Angeles. And, you know, the experiences ranged from the random stories of just sitting in a cafe with my producer at the end of a session, and Denzel Washington walking over to us because he knew this producer. And I just stood there dumbfounded and was like, my jaw was on the floor. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's Denzel Washington. And I couldn't say anything. It was the one and only time I've ever been starstruck. To a friend of mine somehow ending up that I was invited to go sit in for the week-long session of Nas and Damian Marley writing and recording their very first record together. You know, and so these moments were the moments that I was like, oh my gosh, this is what it's all about. But then at the same time, there were the moments, you know, where I remember being invited by a different producer to drop off my demo. And he wanted me to drop off my demo at his house. And he wanted me to drop off my demo at his house at like 10 p.m. And when I got to the door and I knocked on the door with my demo in hand and my keys in my other hand, ready to leave, sure enough, doors open, big screen TV, and there's a porn on it. And I'm invited in to watch this porn. And I'm like, you know, this demo is probably going to go straight into your garbage can, but I'm just going to hand it over and I'm going to take my keys and I'm going to leave. And so there were, you know, these are just sort of some of the stories, some of my experiences going through this process of being a single female in this brand new land, in this brand new world of entertainment, and trying to figure out my path, trying to figure out my footsteps, all the while trying to figure out my artistic identity, my human identity, my desire and ability to build a business, to build a career, you know, so on and so forth. And so even though there were a lot of these like rocky moments of up and down and the experiences, I could probably talk to you guys for like 5 hours and tell you about the random weird things that happened, some of them incredible, and then some of them also like, oh man, you really, you know, like you find yourself, you meet the side of you that maybe you didn't think really could possibly exist, and you come face to face with that person and you're like, okay, now I have a better understanding of who I am, because I've seen what I'm capable of in these different types of moments. But the biggest thing that I pulled out of all of it was that I was a business person. I'm an artist through my spirit and soul and being. There's no other way that I could be, but I'm also a business person. And for me, that was so important when I was going through this industry. I realized very quickly after that experience of being in Los Angeles, I saw very quickly the way other people were being taken advantage of by having to hand over their art, hand over their rights, hand over, in order to get a few dollars here and there, whether it was, you know, advances or so on. And I saw this happening and I said to myself, I don't want that. I don't want to put in so much of my soul into what I do only to hand it over to somebody else for them to be the ones to make all of the money. And now it was a risk, because at the end of the day, you know, this industry is very much, it's about relationships. It's about who you know. It's about when you know them, when you're there. Like there's all kinds of factors, but it is also about the art. And what I've learned over time too is to really trust that. So when I started to prepare to come back to Canada, I was running everything myself. So I was my manager, I was my agent, I was my tour manager, I was my social media person, I was my creative director, I was the artist. I did every single one of the jobs, like, you know, every other person who's a self-run artist, a self-run business in that sense. And it was exhausting. It was a lot of work. But the thing is, that's any job. Right? You really have to put in that energy and that effort and that work. And one of the things that really stuck over time, I had one person ask me at one point early on in my career if I wanted to be famous or if I wanted to have a career, like a long career. Not to say that you couldn't do both, but just to get me to think about the difference of what fame offers and what a career offers, and how you might go about solidifying the career element of it, right? And it was a great thing for me to think of, because I would put that into my mind, I would put that into my heart anytime I came up on a music decision or a business decision. And it stuck with me, right? Like it stuck with me in the sense that I knew I wanted to be an artist. That was now not even a question. And I knew I was a business person, because I was driven by the fact that I wanted to know everything that I possibly could so that nobody could take advantage of me. Because one of the things that, I'm pretty sure as people on this planet, we recognize very quickly, and if we don't, I have many questions, that women and women identifying people are often, if not regularly, at a very different state of advantage in this world. And in the music industry, this is no different. I can tell you how many times that I've entered into a space and colleagues of mine who are male have surpassed me when I was, like when we met, my career was here and theirs was here, and then it just goes and there's skyrockets. And I'm like, okay, like I was holding you guys up when you were down here and I was here, and I was like holding you up. So now that they're up here, I'm expecting to, like get a little hand to, help you along, and it just never comes. And instead of sitting in that space, I decided to do my own thing. I decided that when I sat there and I thought back on this question of whether I wanted to have a career or if I wanted to be famous, and what I realized it was actually going to take. I looked at what I'd done so far. I looked at how I was working towards my career. So this is now entering into my second album. And I looked at the second album and I said, okay, if this is how I want to be able to make a living, if I want to, be an artist who is an artist for a career, then I need to really figure out how to get this business to work for me. And that's what I did. I researched the different roles of an artist's team, management, agents, like all of the different pieces. And I started putting together in my mind almost like a point where I had to say, a point of worth. What I felt my art was worth, what I felt my time was worth, what I felt my presentation was worth. And I started to sit with this and put things together, and I focused on the presentation, I focused on the art, I focused on my time, all of these things, so that when people would come to me and say, okay, we want to book you for this thing, what's your fee? I had a confident answer. I was prepared, and I knew what I was going to say, and I knew that that was what I was worth. And there were so many times that people would come back and question my fee or tell me that it was too much, even though it was, like very, very modest. And I was like, okay, if it's too much, if you don't agree with this fee, thank you for your time. And maybe, in the future, when you feel that it's worthy, we can talk again. And that happened a couple of times. There was one booker in particular who, when the first time they tried to book me, asked for my fee, and it was a very modest fee. I am not one to be like, I'm worth $500,000 and I have half an album out. No, this was not that case. And when I gave them my fee, they were like, oh, well, I'll take it back to the team, but I can't promise you they won't scoff at it. And I'm like, okay, well, if they scoff, they scoff. That's, I don't know what to do with that information. That's my fee. Sure enough, they came back and were like, unfortunately, we can't do this year. And I said, okay, great. Thank you so much. Another time perhaps. The next year came around and the same thing. Now, the thing is, by this point, I've released my second album. I'm performing more and more and more and more. My fee has gone up slightly. So when they come back and ask me to perform again, I say, great, thank you so much. My fee is such and such. And she was like, ooh, that's too high. I can't do it. But not from a place of like, oh, I really wish we could give you that money, but from a place of trying to chip away the value of what it was that I was offering. And that's what I was holding on to. I was saying, if it's above budget and, like we can work together because you really want, this is a wonderful opportunity for me, but also a wonderful event or whatever, of course, that's a very different conversation. But when somebody is trying to chip away at the value of what you're offering, that's when I was like, this is my fee. And this happened 3 years in a row, when finally, by the third time, I had now put out my third record. And, you know, like, as it happens in life, when you continue to progress, you know, like the fees go up. So it changed again. And this third time, I now had an agent, because years had passed as well. And they finally accepted, even though it was like substantially more than what happened in that first year. So my point with all of this story is that the lesson that I pulled away from that was how much the believing in myself and valuing myself played out in this journey. So these are just a couple of real, you know, like tidbits of stories. I mean, we have, you know, we only have such a short time, but yeah, like I have endless stories. I guess my point is that, you know, in this industry, and really I feel like it's applicable no matter where we are, no matter what jobs we're doing, we have to value ourselves. And a lot of times those tools aren't taught to us. We are not necessarily given the opportunity to really value what we do from a place of pride, not from a place of arrogance, right? Like these are different. And to me, I think it's extremely important for everybody who's here with us today to, if there's a possibility to find that spot where you can say, okay, I'm going to look at everything that I contribute to this world, whatever industry it is, whatever path you're on, and find a way to tap into that feeling of valuing what you do. It's work, it's practice, it's you know, it doesn't come easy. It doesn't come easy for me, even still today when things are questioned, right? You know, I'm going through a situation, you know, where I have had to. I've just finished recording an album, so I've been in the studio for the last couple of months writing and recording, and it's now off to the producer for the final edits and so on. But like the bulk of it is done, and even still to this day, with the incredible team of people that I have now, I still really need to advocate for myself in the studio, because it's so easy for women's voices to be swept up and, you know, kind of like put over here on the shelf, even though I'm the artist and they're my songs. So this time I was lucky enough to be working with a producer who listened to me, who valued me and my art, and really tapped into that in order to make this project happen. But I can safely say that this is the first time in my life where I've worked with one producer start to finish. And partly it's because I struggled so much with my voice having enough authority in this space, even though it was my art, even though it was my craft, you know, like I'm the one paying the bills because I'm not signed to any labels. I'm the one running the business that supports all of the elements of my art. And even still, my voice was being plucked and put over here on the shoulder so many times. So at the end of it all, I think that for me, what I've learned is that, you know, knowledge is so much easier to share with other people than it is to necessarily remember the lessons for yourself when you're in them. And as much as I can be like, blah, 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 value yourself, I fully understand how difficult that can be and how it's a work in progress for what could be our entire lives. And that's okay. It's the little pieces that count. It's the moments of finding that spark in yourself, that bit that gets you excited in whatever it is that you're excited about, and holding on to that moment. Because that's the thing that has driven me through all of this. You know, the very quick stories that I've shared are only like the hair surface of what I've experienced in this industry, in this lifetime. And some things have been incredible and some things have been awful. And all of those experiences have been a part of shaping me in this industry, in my life. And I only hope that for everybody here that, you know, you are able to find that little bit of that spark that exists, that pops up right here in the insides of our chest. And I hope and wish for everyone that that can be our guiding thing, our guiding source, our guiding light. ISKWÄ for, you know, coming to hang out and listen. And please, if you guys have any questions, I might have answers. I definitely will have things to say because I can talk for eternity. But otherwise, thank you for having me. Thank you to Venus Fest. This is such a beautiful festival, and I love that you guys are doing such a wonderful job with the mentorship programs and everything as well. So thank you.
Thank you, ISKWÄ. So beautiful to hear about your journey, and I love hearing about your perspective of integrating business with your art. And I know that's something that so many artists struggle with. So it's really amazing to hear about how you've been able to do that in your journey. We don't have any questions from the chat at the moment, so I'll just check in if there's anything else that you want to share. And if not, then we can happily wrap up there.
I think, you know, I think the only other thing that I'm looking down that I didn't mention that I think would be important is that if anybody out there, you know, is interested in or is building a career in music, I can't stress enough how important it is to find a way to retain your rights and to get a lawyer. You know, one thing that was, I remember being told that, and I remember being so broke and needing to take like pennies that I could scramble to get a lawyer to look over a contract. And it was the best decision I made because that contract would have destroyed me otherwise. And I would have never known because you know, it's not my area of understanding. So these are things that I think, you know, we have to, when I say like believe in that spark, we also have to invest in ourselves and not be afraid to invest in ourselves, because really at the end of the day, other people will only invest so much in your career. You have to be the one moving that forward and propelling your career in the way that you want it. And other people will follow suit, but you're the leader.
I think that's a really important point. And I know that I'm not sure if they're still there, but there was a space in the 401 Richmond Street building that does pro bono consultations with artists where they help look at contracts and stuff. So if anyone's listening, that's a great resource.
Yeah.
We do have one question from Sherry, who's asking, how do you choose your creative partners and collaborators?
It varies. I really do rely on my gut for pretty much everything. You know, those who are around me are very used to the saying, for me, talking about my relationship with the universe. And I feel like I have conversations with the universe and it comes through instinctual feelings about people. I definitely look for artists who are unafraid to take risks and chances, because to me that, you know, like I'm always doing that. I'm always trying new things and you know, wanting to try something different, do something different. So when I'm looking for collaborators, artistic collaborators, then that is absolutely the first thing that I look for. What's some of the work that they've done? How do I relate to it? You know, is this somebody that I feel will be a good fit in terms of like my spirit, my being, these kinds of things. I also am very interested in building with people who have interesting stories, dynamic stories of their own, because I feel like that intrigue, when you partner with somebody, we feel that, right? Like we're smashing spirit together in order to create something. So the stories have to be dynamic. They have to be our individual stories. So I would say those are kind of some of the top first things that I'll look for. how interesting I think somebody is. Do I love their art myself? Do I wish I'd created their art? Or do I just want to consume their art?
I love that. It's like a spiritual chemistry that's part of the process.
It kind of is. Like, I know I sound so cosmic, but it's not
Love
that that's happening. But yeah, like it, once I allowed myself to get to that place of just being like, I'm just going to go on my gut, because at the end of the day, what else, what is it there for if not to guide us, right? And it's been, things have been much more digestible once I made that choice.
That's beautiful. So I think we will wrap up for today. I want to say a tremendous thank you to you, ISKWÄ, for sharing about your path and your stories. And a big, big thank you also to Lori and to Ryan, who have been our interpreters today, and all of the care that they both put into their work. And for more information about Venus Fest, if you're watching this, you can visit venusfest.net. This is our final keynote presentation for the summer, but you can watch all 3 of them back on our YouTube channel. Subscribe below the video and stay tuned for some Venus Fest related announcements we have coming soon. So thank you again, and good night to everyone watching.
Thanks.